In this video, we're going to cover the concept of grandfathering. To be clear, this is not a parliamentary term. The word grandfather does not appear in Robert's Rules of Order. The basic meaning underlying the common use of the term grandfather is that a rule does not apply to a certain person or group because that person or group has been engaged in an activity or achieved a certain status prior to the adoption of a new rule on the matter. For example, an individual might say the following: "The new rule that screened porches are not allowed in the neighborhood does not apply to me, since my porch was screened years before the rule was adopted." In this context, it is often said that someone is grandfathered in, meaning that individual is exempt from the rule. So, is any of this accurate? Is there such a thing? Well, yes and no. Let's take a look at an example. Let's say the bylaws of an organization provide that to be eligible to serve on the executive board, an individual must be at least 18 years of age. And let's say with 10 members on the executive board, there are 4 who are between the ages of 19 and 22. Now let's say that a bylaw amendment is adopted that changes the minimum age from 18 to 25. What happens with those who are currently serving on the executive board who are under 25? Are they automatically grandfathered in until their current term is up? Are they allowed to serve any number of subsequent terms so long as they are consecutive with the current term? Are they grandfathered in indefinitely? Or are they off the board as soon as the bylaw amendment is adopted? What would you say? Pause the video if you'd like more time. The answer is, there is no grandfathering at all, and those who are not at least 18 years of age are off the board as soon as the bylaw amendment is adopted. So why is this the case? Well, let's look at 2 important factors. First, the bylaw amendment goes into effect immediately upon adoption, unless another time for its going into effect has been established. Since no later time has been established, the bylaw amendment is in effect. But how does that amendment relate to those individuals already serving on the executive board? Well, that brings us to the second part. The bylaw provision applies to everyone equally, unless the bylaws, a proviso, or a previously adopted rule of the organization provides otherwise. Since there are no such stipulations in this case, the bylaw provision applies to the current executive board members just the same as anyone else. And those who are not at least 25 years of age are not eligible to serve on the board and are therefore no longer on the board. As I mentioned in the beginning, the term grandfather is not used in Robert's Rules of Order. Merriam-Webster defines grandfather in this sense as to permit to continue under a grandfather clause. Merriam-Webster defines grandfather clause as a clause creating an exemption based on circumstances previously existing. You'll notice an additional word in both of those definitions. That's the word clause. Merriam-Webster defines this sense of clause as a distinct article, stipulation, or proviso in a formal document. This highlights the point that you have to be able to point to a specific rule that outlines an exemption for that exemption to exist. You can't just say, "I'm grandfathered in." Often, though, people will think of grandfathering as a general cosmic principle that can be applied to any situation. "I've been doing this for years. A new rule about this wouldn't apply to me. I'm grandfathered in." The truth of the matter is that in parliamentary law, no exemption exists unless one was specifically created. But how do we create one? What if we don't want those members on the executive board to be suddenly ousted from office? What can we do? Well, let's look back at our example. Most of the time, it is not desirable to remove individuals from a board as a consequence of the adoption of a new eligibility requirement. Most organizations prefer to grant an exemption to those who are already serving in that capacity. There are 2 main ways that this can be done. First, a proviso can be adopted to delay the time at which the bylaw amendment goes into effect. For example, during the consideration of the proposed bylaw amendment, that is, the amendment to change 18 years of age to 25 years of age as the minimum requirement to serve on the executive board, a member could obtain the floor and say, "I move to add the following to the motion, provided that this shall not take effect until January 1st, 2000 whatever." Such a proviso requires a second, is debatable, amendable, and requires a majority vote to adopt, regardless of the vote required to adopt the bylaw amendment to which it will apply. So if the proviso is adopted along with the bylaw amendment, The effect of the proviso is to delay the time at which the bylaw amendment takes effect. This means that the new bylaw provision will not affect anyone until that date. When January 1 arrives, nothing more needs to be done. The Assembly has already adopted the bylaw amendment and has already decided that it will go into effect on that date. Such a proviso must be adopted either before or at the same time as the bylaw amendment to which it applies. It cannot be adopted after the adoption of the bylaw amendment. The second way to grant an exemption to those who are already serving on the executive board is to adopt a proviso that specifically excludes those individuals. For example, while the proposed bylaw amendment is being considered, a member could obtain the floor and say, "I move to add the following to the motion, provided that those individuals who are currently serving on the executive board shall not be affected by this amendment for the duration of their current terms on the board." This too requires a second, is debatable and amendable, and requires a majority vote to adopt. And both of these versions could instead be included in the original language of the motion so that there would be no need to add the language during the consideration of the proposed bylaw amendment. And of course, these are just examples. The Assembly can adopt whatever stipulation it would like. Robert's Rules of Order provides, "An amendment to the bylaws goes into effect immediately upon its adoption unless the motion to adopt specifies another time for its becoming effective, or the Assembly has set such a time by a previously adopted motion." Robert's Rules of Order goes on to say, "While the amendment is pending, a motion can be made to amend the enacting words of the motion to amend by adding a clause such as this." Robert's Rules of Order then gives the following example. "With the proviso that, or provided however that, this amendment shall not go into effect until after the close of this annual meeting." Still, though, there will always be people who will tell you that a new rule does not apply to them because they are grandfathered in. I recommend asking them how well they think they would fare if they were pulled over by a police officer for speeding through a construction zone and they tried to say, "Officer, this construction zone speed limit doesn't apply to me because I've been driving on this road before the construction zone speed limit existed. You see, I'm grandfathered in." The point is that people are already familiar with the concept that a new rule applies to everyone. They just tend to fall back on the concept of being grandfathered in whenever it serves them. A grandfather clause is simply a rule that provides an exemption to another rule. Such exemptions do exist, but they are not automatic. So anytime someone tells you he's exempt from a rule, ask him to show you the written rule or proviso that provides that specific exemption. Without such a written rule or proviso, no exemption exists. And without an exemption, the rule applies to everyone equally. To return to our original question, can you be grandfathered in? The answer is yes, but for clarity, let's change the term grandfathered in to exempt from a rule. So, can you be exempt from a rule? Yes, absolutely. But the rule would have to say you're exempt, or there would have to be an exemption adopted by the organization. This brings us to another way you will find an exemption to a rule. This is the clearest and simplest version. The rule simply states the exemption, such as, "All members of the Finance Committee, except the Treasurer, shall attend the Do Finances Really Matter virtual training seminar every year." And there's the exemption right there, except the Treasurer. This is what the Treasurer can point to say, "I don't have to attend that training seminar because I am specifically exempt." Without this exemption in the rule, and assuming the Treasurer is a member of the Finance Committee, the rule would apply to the Treasurer in his capacity as a member of the committee, and he would have to attend the training seminar. So, in summary, are you grandfathered in? Maybe, maybe not. If you don't check the rules, you can't say for sure. That covers the often misunderstood and misused concept of grandfathering.